Okay, welcome back to another episode of Mrs. Mack's AP2 class. Today we are going to be working on the respiratory system. How do you breathe? How does that all work? And how does the respiratory system hang out with the cardiovascular system in order to reoxygenate your blood? So sit back, relax, take some notes, and we'll get going. Okay, respiratory. How do you breathe? Okay, this is chapter 28 in your Salvo book. So go get it and let's start doing this together. Okay, so respiratory system. Let's talk about the parts and then we'll talk about function. Okay. Okay. With the respiratory system, anything referring to the lungs is called pulmonary. Okay. You heard this when we were talking about the pulmonary artery and vein in the cardiovascular system. The pulmonary side is everything dealing with respiration. Okay, so you have two parts. You have the upper respiratory tract and you have the lower respiratory tract. Okay, it's all the same system. Okay, one deals with taking in air and the other one, the lower, deals with gas exchange. Okay, so the upper is actually taking air from the outside and bringing it inside. Okay, when someone says they have an upper respiratory infection, it's up here. If someone has a lower respiratory, that's down here. And that is the scare with what we're dealing with the coronavirus right now, is that it affects your lower respiratory system and can develop into bronchitis, pneumonia, people with respiratory illnesses such as COPD or any kind of asthma. This would affect them. So that's why we're taking super precaution and not have you come in. So it's for your own good. Okay. So upper respiratory tract contains a couple of structures. That would be your nose, your mouth, your pharynx, which I will show you where that is, and your larynx. Okay, so larynx is the dividing line between your upper and your lower respiratory system. We'll talk about why that area is special, but let's talk about the upper first. Okay, the nose and the mouth have the same job. Okay, they need to bring air from the outside world into your body. Now, the mouth is a backup because obviously we use the mouth much more for the digestive system and eating and drinking than we do for breathing. Some people always have a clogged nose, so they tend to be mouth breathers. They tend to snore. But really, air should come in through the nose first because the nose does a couple of jobs. It warms the air that comes in. Anybody who's ever been up north in the wintertime will tell you that if you breathe in through your mouth, it hurts your chest because the lungs are nice and moist and dry and hot, and it does not like cold air coming in there. So the nose actually warms the air, also provides moisture. Okay, so warms the air and moisturizes it, okay? Because nobody likes dry. Moisturizing, sorry. Okay. So warms the air, moisturizes, also contains nose hairs. How does that help breathing? It doesn't. But those nose hairs will catch any pathogens that are trying to get in and kill you, such as your bacteria, your viruses, any airborne stuff trying to get into your body. It's one of your first line of defenses that you'll learn about in the lymphatic system. Okay, so nose is important. We want to, sorry, got an itch. We want to make sure we are nose breathing if we can. So if you've never really breathed through your nose, start practicing. All right, the mouth, same job. It's a backup, okay? If we can't breathe through our nose, we can breathe through our mouth. As we're eating and drinking, we're still taking in air. They just go to different places. All right. The pharynx is the area in the back of the throat where the nose and the mouth meet. So there's actually an open space. If you look at the diagram in your book, you will see that there's an open space where the nose comes down and the mouth joins. That's why sometimes when you drink something and you start to laugh or you cough, there's a slight possibility that fluid's going to come back out of your nose, and anybody that's happened to knows that it's no fun. It burns. So hopefully we're going one way. But there's three different areas of the pharynx. Okay, you have the nasopharynx, which is where the nose meets the back of the throat. You have the oropharynx, where the mouth meets the back of the throat, and you have the laryngeal pharynx, where the larynx meets up with the pharynx. Okay, we differentiate these areas, sorry, give you a little more room there, just so that if you're talking about an illness or if you're talking about infection, we can be more specific as to where things are. Okay, so oropharynx is the mouth, naso is the nose, larynx, laryngeal pharynx. Okay, pretty simple, right? Of course, good job. Okay, so now we're going to get into the larynx, which we said is the dividing line. The larynx is pretty important. Okay. So if we were to take a side view of a person, wish I could draw a face. Okay, well, that's kind of a face. Okay, no laughing at my drawing. Okay, here's the naso area, here's the oro area. Okay, there's two tubes in the back of the throat. Okay, this one is the trachea, which eventually will lead to our lungs. Okay, and we'll get to that when we get down a little bit further. This pink line leads to the esophagus, which actually goes to the stomach, and that's where we send our food and drink. But this area right here has a little trap door, okay? At the beginning of the larynx, there is a trap door. It's actually a piece of cartilage, and it blocks your trachea while you're eating or drinking so that food and water or liquid doesn't get into your lungs. So it will seal the trachea and push the food back towards the esophagus and down to the stomach. This trap door is called the epiglottis. Okay, epi meaning above, right? Epiglottis. So if it's epiglottis, what is it above? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's above the glottis. Okay, so let's get rid of this for a second. Your glottis is here. And the glottis is the structure that holds your voice box, or your vocal cords. Okay? Your vocal cords are what give you your voice, right? Remember in The Little Mermaid, Ursula takes her voice? Well, that's what she was after, that glottis. So what happens is the epiglottis closes and doesn't allow air to pass over the voice box, which is technically why you don't talk when you eat, although some teenagers, I would disagree with that. But what happens is, as the epiglottis opens the trap door and lets air in, air comes down over your voice box and it vibrates, okay? This little structures, and that's how you speak. If it vibrates very quickly, your voice is very high. If it vibrates very slow, your voice is very low. Okay, and we can train our vocal cords to either go quickly or slower. Singers often practice this technique. Okay, so you have the glottis, the epiglottis above it, and these are both contained in that larynx area. Okay. So that's the whole upper respiratory system. Pretty easy. It's basically allowing air to come in and to be passed down to the lower respiratory system. So again, nose, mouth, comes back to the throat, goes to your nasopharynx, your oropharynx, your laryngeal pharynx. Your glottis contains the vocal cords. The epiglottis is the trap door that closes the trachea so that food and drink go back to the esophagus. Okay? Pretty simple. Now let's go to the lower respiratory. Okay? So in the lower respiratory system, you have the trachea, which we just mentioned. We have the primary bronchi. You have bronchioles. You have alveoli or alveoli, and you have capillaries. Okay, hopefully most of you remember capillaries from the cardiovascular system. All right, so let's take these structures one at a time. Trachea, this is the tube that connects the mouth to the lungs. Okay, it has cartilage in it, okay, because we have the tube, but then we have these rings of cartilage. So why on earth do we need cartilage rings in the trachea? Good question. One, for structure, keeps the trachea open at all times, whereas the esophagus is more of smooth muscle and the esophagus will collapse onto itself and sort of close when it's not being used. When you eat something, the esophagus opens and allows the food to pass. But if we didn't have our trachea open all the time, we wouldn't breathe. That's not a good thing. So these cartilage rings keep that trachea open. Okay, the other reason is flexibility. Okay, as we're breathing, we need those lungs to expand. So those cartilage rings open and close, very similar to your ribs, right? When we breathe in, the ribs have to move out of the way. So they need cartilage off the sternum. Same idea. Okay, that's the whole job of the trachea, just to be a passageway so that that air can get in and get into the lungs. Okay. Now what's interesting about air is that air is not pure oxygen. Okay? Our body needs oxygen to function, but actually air is not that much oxygen. So when we're talking about air, air consists of about 80% nitrogen and 20% is oxygen. Now, actually, I think that nitrogen number is about 78% technically. You have some argon, some helium in the air. You have all different gases that you're breathing in, nitrous oxide, stuff like that. But for the most part, it's an 80-20 split. So you would think the body would thrive on nitrogen because there's so much available. But it's actually the oxygen we need. So a lot of places you'll see now have opened that have like oxygen bars. You can come in and sniff pure oxygen. Well, A, oxygen is extremely flammable, so that's not the best idea. And B, too much oxygen is not good either. So don't go to those oxygen places, save your money and just breathe. The cool thing is that our Earth supplies most of this oxygen, if not all of it. How does it give us oxygen? Trees. Trees give off oxygen as a waste product. We give off carbon dioxide as a waste product, which the plants need to breathe. So as we're killing all the trees on this planet, we're destroying our oxygen supply. Think about it. Do you really want to pay for oxygen? No. So grow some plants. Keep plants in your house. It's good for you. Okay, good for the environment. And stop tearing down all the trees to build more houses. Anyway, that's my little soapbox. Okay, so oxygen is only about 20% of the air we breathe. And you should write that down because that has been an NBLEX question, just so you know. Okay, so trachea brings in air to the lungs. In order to get down to the lung, we have to split. So this trachea divides into right and left sections. Okay, again, still has those rings. But these primary bronchi actually feed right into the lung. Okay. Okay. As these bronchi come down into the lungs, they get smaller. Okay, smaller, smaller, smaller. These branches that look like trees will come off the main bronchi. Okay, and they just keep branching and branching and branching. These are called bronchioles. Okay, and they're on both sides. I'm just drawing it on the one, but obviously it happens on both. Okay, and then they'll get thinner and thinner, thinner and thinner. And these bronchioles keep branching down until they become microscopic. Okay, they just keep getting smaller and smaller. On the ends of the smallest bronchioles are these alveoli. Okay, an alveoli is an air sac. Okay, they look like grapes. Okay, and there's millions of them. and they store oxygen, pure oxygen. So as you're breathing in, the alveoli expand and contract, allowing air in and getting rid of carbon dioxide. So we take in oxygen and we expel CO2. Okay, on top of these on top of these alveoli are blood vessels. Those are our capillaries. Okay. And it's actually not in the alveoli that some people think, but it's in the capillaries where that gas exchange happens. Okay, it diffuses. O2 diffuses back into the blood. CO2 diffuses out of the blood. Okay, remember passive transport back in our cells. Here we are. Okay, and there's internal and external respiration going on, which we'll get to. Okay, but know that gas exchange happens at the capillary level. So the blood that's reoxygenated, that goes back into the bloodstream, is headed where? Nope. It's headed back to your left atria, right? All the reoxygenated blood comes back from the lung into that left atria, to the left ventricle, back out to the body, right? So this is where it's happening, in the lower respiratory system. All right, got it? Okay, good. Let's keep going. Okay, so we'll erase this. Okay. In your book, you should have a picture of the lungs going down to that capillary level. You could take a look at that, see how that works. Some accessory structures that we deal with, okay, are muscles. Okay, the lungs are smooth muscle. They expand and contract. Okay, you also have your diaphragm. You have intercostal muscles. You have your anterior. Nope, still didn't get it. Of course, if I had gotten that in, it would have been amazing, but you weren't here to see it. Anterior, middle, and posterior scalenes. And some of your abdominal muscles. Okay, so when we are taking in a breath, our diaphragm is the main muscle of the respiratory system. That is absolutely an NCLEX question, so highlight that. Okay, diaphragm equals main muscle of respiratory. Because what happens is the diaphragm sits right here under your rib cage. Okay, when you take a breath in, the lung tissue has to expand. Facebook, okay, I'll get to that later. So when the lung tissue opens, it needs a place to go. It can't just sit there. So the ribs, your skeletal ribs, have to move out of the way, which is again why you have cartilage on the rib cage to allow that expansion. Okay, so the diaphragm sits here, it's in the way. You can't breathe because your diaphragm's here. So what happens is when you breathe in, the diaphragm compresses and it moves down. Okay, go in your books and look up the diaphragm muscle and look where it is. Okay, it's sort of like an umbrella shape. So the diaphragm muscle will move out of the way, allowing those lower lungs to fill up with air and expand. Right? Okay, so it's think of like a fish gill. It opens and closes. That's how your rib cage is. The diaphragm will contract, and then when you're ready to exhale, it's not the lungs that are getting the air out, it's that diaphragm. The diaphragm comes back up where it should be and pushes that air out. So imagine if you have a tight diaphragm, you're going to have a hard time breathing. Okay, this is a skeletal muscle. Okay, you're going to work on that muscle on your clients. So when the diaphragm contracts, it actually folds in, and then when it expands, it pops back up to its normal size, pushing out the air that you're breathing. Pretty neat, right? Intercostal muscles are just that. They're in between each rib. So again, they open and close, open, close. And then of course your six pack of your abdominals helps as well. Keep everything tight, high and tight. But main muscle, diaphragm. You want to know that one because you will get questioned a lot. The anterior, middle, and posterior scalenes are up here as part of the neck. If you notice, everybody feel their neck. That collarbone right here, your rib starts right there. So those muscles will pull the collarbone up, allowing that lung tissue to expand. Now, when we take a breath, we're not really, forgot I went to get gas. When you're taking a breath, you're using the lung here. You're not really using the lung here. So let's do a little exercise. And I know I can't see you, but you better do it. Okay, we're going to take a breath in and we're going to hold it. Okay, don't let it go. Now breathe in again. Okay, you feel it like here now. Don't let it go. Breathe in one more time. And now you're feeling it up here or even in your throat. Okay, that's a true breath. That's where you should breathe every time. But none of us do it. We're very shallow in our breath. But if you do yoga or if you work out, you start breathing faster because your body's needing more oxygen, you'll start to feel it up higher. So when you're feeling stressed out, when you're feeling anxious, just do some of those really deep breaths and you'll feel amazing and a lot better because you've just gotten a nice hit of oxygen. Okay? Cool beans. All right, so I'm going to turn you around for a second. Okay, this is the picture in your book. So here is your nose. Here's your mouth, obviously. Here is the passageway for air, and you could see here's the opening in the back of the throat. Here's your tongue. The air comes in over the tongue to the back of the throat. And then this little tube is that esophagus we were talking about. Here is the trachea in the front. So trachea is anterior to the esophagus. Okay, here's the glottis. Okay, here's that epiglottis, the trap door we were talking about. And then your vocal cords are in here. Pretty cool. So that's upper. Let me go back to lower. Okay, here's the trachea, the primary bronchi, and then we get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till we get to these little alveoli and capillaries. Okay, pretty cool, right? Looks like a little tree. So that's how the whole thing works. Okay, we went over that, went over bronchioles. Okay, one thing I forgot to tell you about the alveoli is they have a covering on them. Okay, they're covered with a substance called surfactant, which is slimy. Why do I need a slimy surface on my alveoli? Well, because they expand and contract, you don't want any friction there because they'll burn out. So the lungs sit in a whole container, so to speak, of pleural fluid. Okay, because you have your lungs. Okay. Then you have the lung tissue that sits inside the sac because, again, you need room for them to expand and contract. But this is all filled with this pleural fluid. And again, it keeps it from drying out, it keeps it from friction, and it keeps those lungs nice and moist to allow movement to occur. So surfactant keeps the alveoli from sticking to each other and keeps them hydrated. Okay, we went over diaphragm. Okay. Now I want to go over a couple of terms with you that you might hear. Okay, we have inhalation, we have inspiration, and we have ventilation. Okay, each of these words mean the same thing. Okay, this is the act of taking in air. Into the body. Okay, the act of taking in air into the body. So any of these words might be used on the emblex, so just make sure you know the meaning. People who can't breathe and need assistance are placed on what? A ventilator, right? A machine that breathes for you. So that's where ventilation comes from. Inhalation, inhale, to take in, okay? And then inspiration. So the opposite of that would be expiration or exhalation, right? Okay, that's the opposite. You have to have it come in, you got to have it go out. If you don't have it go out, you're going to suffocate yourself. Okay. All right. So when you exhale, you are putting CO2 back into the environment because we don't need that in our bodies, but plants do. So go exhale on your plants. They'll appreciate it. Okay. All right. And again, if this video goes too quickly, please stop it, go back, rewind it, listen to it again, read it with your book so that it makes sense. If you need to, hit up your crash course videos as a backup or draw it out. You know, take your pen and paper and just draw it. All right. Okay, so there's two other terms that I want you to know. There's external respiration and internal respiration. Okay, now the word respiration here is different than inhalation or ventilation. Respiration pertains to cells. Okay, write that down. So this is cellular breathing. What? Yeah, that's what I said. Cells. Amazing. They're made of organelles. Okay. So you have internal and external respiration. Both occur by, say it, diffusion. Okay. Who knew when I taught you diffusion about the cells that you would need it so much, but I told you you will, and this is a good example. So external respiration is when oxygen diffuses from air in the lungs, crosses into the respiratory membrane, and moves into the bloodstream. Okay, so this is from inside the cell to out of the lungs. Okay, so internal respiration is the opposite. Comes from the lungs to inside the cell. And we're talking about O2 here. Okay, so when we're talking about cardiovascular system and how the blood gets reoxygenated, bam, here it is, right here, okay? External is, it's from inside the cell, so once the cell reoxygenates it, it goes out to the bloodstream, to the rest of the body. Internal is where it's coming from that right side of the heart into the lungs needing oxygen. Okay, so write that down, that's important. Okay, external goes from the cell to the bloodstream. This comes from the bloodstream inside the cell. Capiche? Okay, good. And that's really it for the respiratory system. There are some other things in your book that you should be reading as far as the structures of the nose and the mouth and all that. But that's the whole thing in a nutshell. We take air in, we oxygenate ourselves, we get rid of waste. Okay, how that happens is through alveoli capillary. Very important. Okay, do your packet. I'll see you later. Bye.